Hey guys, it's KJ from the Scariest Movie Ever channel on YouTube. I wanted to talk a little bit about this most interesting man in the world ad campaign. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with this campaign. This is from Dos Equis, and it features a man that seems to have everything he could ever want. Women, money, all kinds of adventures, and of course all the Dos Equis he could drink. So this character right here was the original most interesting man in the world, and they've recently switched him up to a younger version. But this video is not so much just about these guys, it's about the message behind the most interesting man in the world. If you're familiar with my channel and the kind of work I do, you know that we typically look at the world through more spiritual eyes. There always seems to be underlying messages, meanings, there's synchronicities, the language of symbols even. So what message are we really supposed to be receiving from the most interesting man in the world? To me, this is a figurehead of the beast system. If we believe in God, we know there's an enemy, we know there's a devil. Many of us believe that the devil runs this world. And in my opinion, the most interesting man in the world is a prime example of what the enemy wants us here in this world to be chasing. What is it that really makes a man? Sex is a really big part of this ad campaign. Most of the ads for the most interesting man in the world typically feature him with not one, but two women. Because, of course, one woman's just not enough for this guy, right? But it's not about love. It's not about commitment. It's about feeding all of our most basic, animalistic desires. So we constantly see the most interesting man in the world featured with two very attractive women. And typically the women in these commercials are checking each other out as well, insinuating that kind of lesbian three-way type situation that the most interesting man in the world, of course, probably experiences all the time. And the enemy of humanity is not concerned with you meeting one person, falling in love, having children and a family, and staying devoted to one another for your entire lives. The enemy of humanity wants you to focus, once again, on your most basic animalistic drives and desires. So keep in mind, we're not focusing on this actor or this ad campaign itself. We're focusing on the message behind it. I'm going to show you some other examples of how this manifests in our modern media all the time. And once again, this has us focusing on anything but a spiritual path, anything but enlightenment. So before we continue, I thought this picture was interesting as well. I wanted you to keep this in mind because we're going to come back to some of this a little bit later. I'm going to show you some news stories that connect with this as well, that have to do with these sex parties that are starting to show up all around America, really all around the world. I'll show you some of that as well. And typically it involves a lot of these masks, and we've seen this kind of a theme before, typically associated with high-level occultists, or what some say the Illuminati is. The wealthy, the elite, having these weird sex parties, wearing masks and whatnot. Once again, I'll show you some of that here in just a little bit. So remember, let's look beyond the ad campaigns. Let's look beyond the personalities. We're looking at an idea here. Now, who is this? Most of you probably know. This is Hugh Hefner, the creator of Playboy magazine. And this is a man that's been put forth for decades as the ultimate goal of a male perfection, or a male perfected reality, surrounded by beautiful women, all the money you could ever have to spend. And once again, this is the idea. If you're a spiritual person like myself, if you believe in God, if you try to follow the ways of Christ, etc., etc., then you'll know that this is not the ideal plan for humanity. That to truly live a blessed life, at least a spiritually blessed life, it's about modesty, generosity, humility. This world never pushes that idea. This world pushes that we should achieve everything materialistic. You should have sex with as many beautiful people as possible and attain all the wealth that you can attain. This is counterintuitive to the spiritual person, the person following a spiritual path, or someone who's following God or loving God, or someone who's trying to follow the ways of Christ. And again, it's interesting when you go beyond the narrative of these types of stories and we look for the truth. I did a video several months ago called All Porn is Gay, and it had to do with a tell-all book that had been released about Hugh Hefner. He was explaining that his sexual rituals were basically him in his bedroom on Viagra with 3 huge screens in his room and a trail of beautiful women dressed in pink, lingerie and whatnot. Usually 6 or so, half a dozen, maybe a little more at times. They would walk into the room and they would actually sit on his erect penis with Viagra, and they would perform a sex act. But most interestingly is while they were doing this, Hugh Hefner was watching these big screens in his room, and on all of these screens they were featuring gay pornography. So this completely and totally destroys this idea of this is what it's all about to be a man, right? To have all these things. But what happens to a man that has anything and everything his dark heart desires? That path usually leads to complete and total debauchery, or even death, and spiritual enslavement as well. So where else in popular culture have we seen this very same idea? The connection that I've been showing you from following your most basic dark desires as being the real pinnacle of male success in this world is exemplified in the television show Lucifer. This just goes to show once again that connection to this satanic beast system we're in, that this is what they want all males to believe in achieving, that this should be the ideal, the worldly ideal to a perfect existence. It spells it out right here. In this television show, once again, here's Lucifer itself. Has all the money he could ever want. Fame, fortune, and all the chicks, right? He's always got beautiful women he's having sex with. Anyone he chooses. So another great example of this mindset comes to us from Dan Bilzerian, who's an Instagram celebrity, plays poker, shoots guns, lies around in actual piles of strippers. I mean, this guy is how 13-year-old boys might imagine adulthood. He's an all-American pro poker player who became famous on Instagram for being both exceptionally rich and spending his entire life shooting guns, partying, flying in private jets, and having constant, uncomplicated sex with literal piles of women. He's also very fond of goats. I thought this was interesting. Again, once more a connection to that satanic idea. We know that not all goats are evil, alright, I'm not saying that. But we do find the goat as a common symbol of modern Satanism. We see this time and time again all through modern media and popular culture. We also have the GOAT meme, and I've covered this in a video a while back. They say it's an acronym for greatest of all time. Typically they associate this with sports stars. But again, I try to show people how the nature of the language of symbols is right before our very eyes, and yet so few people see. We are in a satanic system. We are in a beast system, and the enemy itself believes itself to be the greatest of all time. And we see this connected right here again with this idea of what does it mean to be the greatest of all time, but to have everything at your disposal, to be wealthy, incredibly wealthy, to have all the women you want, all the drugs, all the drinking, all the partying. This is what this world wants us to see as being the greatest of all time, also associated with the goat, which by extension we see the goat associated so commonly with the Baphomet, or the goat god, or Satan itself. So this is a spirit we're dealing with. This is a spiritual movement we're dealing with. And I see the same thing in what they call the LGBTQ community. And this isn't pinpointing every homosexual person out there. But there is certainly a narrative at play in the mainstream that we see with this. And once again, this is full-blown narcissism, at the very least. It's about focusing on the surface. And this right here is a 8-year-old transsexual whose stage name is Lactatia. And I've covered this child in some other videos. They've taken the sweetness and the innocence of an 8-year-old child and it's been perverted. And many people in this movement now we see is all focused on the surface, on how hot are you, right? So it has nothing to do with how you are spiritually, or what kind of humility you have, or any purity. All that's out the window. I also find it interesting they gave this child an award, and the award is the upside down star. And the upside down star brings us back to the goat, and the goat in this case is the Baphomet. And the Baphomet itself is the embodiment of the transsexual, or the she-male, or the he-she. It's a combination of both male and female, connected with these satanic ideas. And why is it satanic? This is literally putting up a finger to God's creation. It's telling God that, the way you created me, it's just not working for me. I'm going to choose something else. So I wanted to show you this. This is actually from the churchofsatan.com, and this is their main page. Many of these people try to put themselves off as atheists. But whether they're literally conducting rituals or they're just using Satanism as a way to, upset Christians, the same idea is here. The same narrative is there about you being your own God, which is what we're talking about. As Anton LaVey explained in his class of work, The Satanic Bible, man using his own brain invented all the gods, doing so because many of our species cannot accept or control their personal egos, feeling compelled to conjure up one or a multiplicity of characters who can act without hindrance or guilt upon whims and desires. All gods are thus externalized forms, magnified projections of the true nature of their creators, personifying aspects of the universe or personal temperaments, which many of their followers find to be troubling. Worshipping any god is thus worshipping by proxy those who invented that god. Since the Satanist understands that all gods are fiction, instead of bending a knee in worship to or seeking friendship or unity with such mythical entities, he places himself at the center of his own subjective universe as his own highest value. So as you can see here, we're also dealing with full-blown narcissism. This is exactly what that system is promoting. And we get stories like this. Male cosmetics counters could hit department stores in 5 years. So once again, this is all about the surface. This isn't trying to build yourself up spiritually or trying to find your ideal self or to self-actualize or to possibly follow the ways of Christ and once again be the most holy person you can be. This is about the outer. This is about the exterior. This is about the surface stuff. And this sick idea, this disgusting narrative, it just covers all kinds of people. It's not just the LGBTQ or the Satanists or the atheists. You may have seen this story. The Vatican's Swiss guards break up a drug-fueled gay orgy in Pope Francis's backyard. This is an epidemic we're looking at. This is spiritual. Remember earlier I'd shown you a picture of the so-called most interesting man in the world surrounded by a couple of beautiful women wearing sexy masks. And we've seen that narrative play out before our eyes before as well, connected with these satanic secret societies, or the Illuminati, or the Hollywood satanic secret societies. So more and more we're getting stories like this right here coming out now too. Inside the Skirt Club, Hollywood, New York's high glamour sex party for women only. And we have stories like this. What happens at a black tie sex soiree for Hollywood wives? Of course, we got the masks. And it also reminded me of this story from not long ago. Kate Middleton, Princess Kate, I guess you could say, her good friend hosts sex parties for the rich and famous. Again, we're seeing elements of this Satanism in our society all around us, promoting this idea of focusing on your deepest, darkest desires, your most basic instincts, the animal within. And speaking of Satanism, they really are leaking their ways into the mainstream. They've been doing this a lot over the last few years, but this will be a really interesting one here. Mansfield 6667, it's a new movie coming out, documents Jane Mansfield's connection to the occult. And Jane Mansfield, of course, is Marilyn Monroe. And on the left over there is the actual poster for this documentary coming out, Mansfield 6667, with Marilyn Monroe standing in front of what? The Baphomet, again, the goat, right? The greatest of all time. And here's an image that one of my Facebook friends sent to me recently. This is from actual news headlines. You can look into this yourself. Planned Parenthood teams up with Satanists to expand the Missouri abortion business. So this should come as no surprise. Once again, it's a subject I've covered in videos in the past, is that connection to the occult and Planned Parenthood. No knee will bow, and look at the sign down there. What do we have once again? The goat, right? So again, this is that spirit that we keep finding up in so many of these same stories. This is how we read the symbols. We can go beyond the narrative and we can watch the symbols and get a much more complete idea. So now we know who the most interesting man in the world is, at least according to this whole ad campaign. We can read beyond the narrative. We can read beyond the surface. The most interesting man in the world that they're promoting is the goat, the so-called greatest of all time, the enemy, the devil itself. They keep us focusing on things of this world, where what's really most important is to focus on things beyond this world. So thanks once again for watching the video, guys. I really appreciate you out there. You all take care, and I'll talk to you a little later.